frankly speaking, we're seeing the same attacks go after everyone, right? The same threat actors, nation state or otherwise, that are attacking the state of Arizona or the city of Phoenix or Maricopa County, they're going after attacks. We're seeing some interesting use of generative AI, where typically you would look at a phishing email.
Hey Ryan, so thanks so much for coming on the podcast. As a way of
Yeah,
getting
of course.
started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me. Obviously, super excited to always talk about cybersecurity and state of Arizona. Ryan Murray, Deputy Director for the Arizona Department of Homeland Security and Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Arizona.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Of course. So what would you like to know? Let's talk cyber.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the journey to becoming
Sure.
a CISO. I think that's one I think a lot of people in cyber probably strive to become a CISO. It's always an interesting story.
Yeah, so for me, I kind of took the traditional route. I'm, a dyed-in-the-wool traditional technologist, uh, born and raised here in Arizona, worked for a school district doing technology, sort of started as a desktop tech, building my own computers in high school and college, did an internship with a technology company, sort of transitioned, graduated into doing data center, network engineering, system administration, all that fun stuff. And just through working through that technology, really understanding and seeing how it could be taken advantage of. I was an old school exchange administrator, so seeing the weird things that we'd see come through email, phishing campaigns, phishing attacks, compromise of users' accounts, and then really transitioning into a security role as an analyst and an engineer, trying to figure out how do we stop this stuff from happening? How do we put better protections in place? How do we make sure that our users and our employees are trained to identify those attacks? And then how do we put protections to prevent them from happening? And then really transitioning from there into cybersecurity leadership. That transition from technology to management is an interesting jump for myself, especially. I was really hesitant to make that transition. I've always been a fan of solving puzzles and specifically technology puzzles, and that jump from tech puzzles to people puzzles is a bit jarring. And I was, like I said, super hesitant at first, but eventually decided, look, there's a lot of other things that we could be doing. Every system is hackable, even human-centered systems. How do we find ways to protect those as well as the technology we're trying to protect? So eventually made the jump to CISO at one of our other state agencies, and I've been doing this at the statewide enterprise level for the last 2.5 years now.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that transition. So it sounds like Tim leaves. There's a change of governor. That was kind of your opportunity to advance. Talk a little bit about that. What was that transition like? Was it stressful, big learning curve?
Yeah, I mean, definitely stressful, right? Any new changes, any new challenges are always going to have some stress involved, but also, a great opportunity for growth. And I'll say when Tim brought me over as his deputy, back in 2021, geez, that seems like ages ago now. It was really him understanding his own strengths and weaknesses, right? Tim did not come up through a technology background, but fantastic at what he does, which is building relationships and grand vision, strategic planning type stuff. And being able to say, look, I need someone who can come in and run the day to day of the cyber operations of the state, while I go out there and make friends and influence people and implement my grand strategy. I need someone who can be boots on the ground, helping to make sure that those things are actually happening. And after Tim left, I essentially had to take over both of those roles, right? So still overseeing day-to-day tactical and operational implementation of our cyber strategy, but also now helping to build that cyber strategy, trying to implement my own grand visions and continue to see the plans set forward by Tim and his predecessor, seeing those continue to mature and move forward into the future. So I think that's probably been the biggest challenge for me is having to squish both of those things, because that's like super left brain and right brain stuff, right? Having to squish both of those together and figure out a way to make them both functional as well as like long-term strategic planning. has definitely been a challenge, but something I feel has helped me grow significantly as a professional. Being able to see sort of both sides of the coin, right? Talking to my managers and my operations teams that are really in the weeds, boots on the ground, technical, because that's my background, understanding what they're talking about, understanding what their challenges are and what they're trying to accomplish, but also trying to take that up a level and say, look, we've got some big things we want to get done across the entirety of the state. How do we implement those strategic plans as well as do them at a tactical and operational level?
Awesome. Yeah, so can we talk a little bit about some of the plans? Kind of what's the
Sure.
5-year vision? How are things changing in the cybersecurity landscape? And even, I know 2021 feels like forever ago, but technology is just changing so fast. What are some of the advances on that side of things?
Well, I'll say there's really two big things here. Obviously, we can't get out of a cyber or technology podcast without talking about AI and specifically generative AI, which I'll touch on, maybe a little bit later. But I'll say, frankly speaking, especially in government, we still continue to struggle with all of the same things. So all of the old school tricks that the threat actors have been using for forever, they're still continuing to be effective with. So we're talking about phishing campaigns, we're talking about password reuse, we're talking about insecure and weak passwords, people not using multi-factor authentication, really just having solid endpoint detection and response capabilities, knowing that several of our other controls and that layered defense is going to fail at some point, including up to the people that are using that technology. So realistically, looking at all of those, I'll say foundational elements of a cybersecurity program, and then making sure that we can provide that to every level of government. And I'll say that's kind of the grand 3 to 5 year plan that really Tim started, and it's something that I've kind of taken up as my mantle of this whole of state strategy of really trying to understand that all of our government entities, cities, counties, tribal communities, our school districts, everyone is fighting the same fight. And we need to be looking at this from a community problem, from a collective defense problem, where every entity in Arizona should be part of defending the rest of Arizona. And kind of taking that NATO mentality of if we see one organization in Arizona get attacked, we should consider that an attack against the entirety of the state. So, really trying to ramp up the best use of taxpayer funds to provide best in class cybersecurity protections for all of our local governments. And in many cases, this is stuff that these entities wouldn't be able to afford or wouldn't even be able to entertain the opportunity of if they were trying to explore it on their own. So, buying this stuff at the state level, using the economies of scale and the buying power of the entire state of Arizona to get some pretty screaming deals on a lot of this tech, and then being able to raise the bar, raise a lot of these entities truly out of the cyber poverty level to help them protect themselves from attacks. And frankly speaking, we're seeing the same attacks go after everyone, right? The same threat actors, nation state or otherwise, that are attacking the state of Arizona or the city of Phoenix or Maricopa County. They're going after attacks, targets of opportunity across the rest of the state, just because they don't have those defenses in place. So we've been pushing really heavy just to get everyone up to that foundational level.
Yeah, what's been the biggest challenge with that? Is it technical acumen, like knowing how to use those tools that I believe under Tim, they started supplying grants to buy things like like CrowdStrike or an EDR, and upgrade a lot of their security functionality, which it seems like you'd have the problem. One, it takes a while to train up and learn those things, as well as that change management, deploying it, especially if kind of in some of that old school infrastructure where it might not be compatible.
Yep, for sure. And exactly right. We started this out as a grant program providing these tools, and we've really transitioned it almost to a managed service where the state is now functioning as an MSSP for a lot of our local government entities. So you mentioned CrowdStrike, that's one of our partners. We're pushing CrowdStrike to as many local government entities as we possibly can. What's super unique about this is it then gives us the visibility across the entire state to see, say, a school district gets attacked with a piece of malware. We can now correlate that to every other entity that's seen it. We can share that information with the community to say, even if you're not using our products or platforms, if you've got another EDR solution, here's something that CrowdStrike tripped over. Make sure that you're blocking this in your environment. And then sharing that realistically across the state and across the nation to help share with our federal partners and other state partners in other states. So I'll say to get back to your question, one of the big challenges, and I guess two big challenges, is yes, absolutely finding dedicated, talented cybersecurity defenders, specifically on the technical level, out in local government entities, where a lot of them don't even have a dedicated IT team. They've maybe got one person that does technology part time. They're a teacher. They're maybe someone else that had some technical acumen, or maybe happened to use computers 20 years ago, so now they're the IT guy or gal. That's really what we're seeing a lot of these organizations across the state. And how we're trying to combat that is, again, providing these tools, but also providing the crowdsourced support to help get them up to speed, get them trained, and then rely on us as a truly whole of community team to help support those efforts. So if we're all using the same tools, we can all rely on each other to help solve some of these problems, right? None of this stuff is unique. So all of the challenges that I've had deploying our tools, we can share all those lessons learned and best practices with all the other entities. We're also trying to utilize some of the federal grants to be able to staff augment, so hire some contractors, hire some additional full-time employees. Because I'll say, not only is it if you have people in your organization to be able to understand this technology and learn this technology, to your point, it takes time to get up to speed, to get trained. But in the meantime, those attacks are still happening. So how do we make sure we deploy this stuff immediately, get you started, get you protected while your staff is getting trained up? And the only way we can really do that is just augmenting our capacity to provide that capability.
One thing that you mentioned is sometimes you have that de facto IT management where they may have been somebody who's familiar, but certainly not to the level of like a system administrator or CTO, CISO, which you hear that story play out in the private sector quite a bit, and it doesn't always end
Yeah.
well. How much does it make sense for smaller governments like the tribal communities or local governments like counties and cities and towns to outsource some of that to their MSPs or MSSPs, especially the stuff that the state government can't fill?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we always need to look at public-private partnerships where it makes sense. There's some things where government's just not going to be able to fill that need, and whether that's at the state level or the local level, there's more funding to be had than there is talent within government entities, right? So if we have the capability, and frankly, we all have to figure out a way to make this work because our citizens are demanding those services, whether that's digitized services, whether that's online portals. People want to be able to provide these technological services to their citizens, and we need to make sure that those are being provided in a secure fashion. And if we can't do that, we need to find partners that can help us make it go.
So, kind of on a related trend, what are some of the threat actors? I know we mentioned phishing and ransomware and things like that, but what are sort of the new things that we're seeing with a lot of the not only the state government but a lot of these smaller counties as well?
For sure. I'll say, similar to what I mentioned earlier, what's old is new again. We're seeing a lot of the same things happen, just new twists on them. So for phishing, for example, to tie it back to kind of our AI discussion, we're seeing some interesting use of generative AI, where typically you would look at a phishing email and say, we've got these traditional red flags of there's misspellings, maybe there's some weird grammatical errors. This person clearly doesn't have English as their first language, kind of scammy, kind of, you can kind of pick out some of those red flags. What we're seeing threat actors do is starting to use generative AI to say, write me a phishing email targeted for this specific organization, and then it'll spit it out in plain, well written English that takes away a lot of those red flags that we've trained our users to identify. And I don't have any direct evidence of this, but I think we're going to start to see a trend where as entities have email mailboxes compromised, that information is going to get exfiltrated and dumped into a language learning model where the threat actor is then going to say, write me a phishing email in the voice of this person who I've just compromised, take their signature, take their header information, write it in a style that they would be writing to this target and make it look as believable as possible, and then spit me out a phishing message that I can send that's going to give me, as high a degree as possibility of actually hitting that target.
That's dangerous. How do you go about preventing an attack like that? If it looks the part, smells the part, you know, and it reads perfect.
It's Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying, really. And I unfortunately, the only way that we're going to combat this one is continuing to train our users to look for the red flags that will continue to exist. Is that domain accurate? Is this something that someone you've already done business with? Put other controls in place, like calling that person on the phone and saying, "Hey, this is kind of a weird email from you. You've never asked me to do something like this before," or "Hey, you're asking me to change the account that I'm sending $2 million for this business transaction. That seems a little unusual. Is this something that you're actually asking me to do?" So, using those out of band communications, using other methods to validate information that's coming through email or other methods, I think those sort of traditional ways to combat phishing are still going to work. It's just we need to be more vigilant than ever to try to identify those sort of anomalies as part of those attacks.
On that subject, I know there's been a lot of talk around like AI generated phishing or deep fakes.
Yeah.
How much has that been popping up on the radar?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, I'm not going to get too much into elections and all that fun stuff, but as we roll into the election cycle, it's something that we're working really closely with our county departments as well as the Secretary of State's office to better understand the threat of synthetic content, those deep fakes, because we know that they're going to be utilized. They're already being utilized, frankly. And trying to understand from a training and teaching perspective, this is what's capable, so all of our employees, all of our state employees, our election officials, the people that are helping to run those elections, as well as the citizens, are aware of what those threats look like. And it's coming from a trusted source to say, this is what a deep fake looks like. This is how to spot some of the telltale signs, those red flags, so to speak. And know that threat actors are using this technology to come after you, to try to spread misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And again, it all comes back to education and awareness, knowing that the threat is there and teaching people to try to identify it. And it's something, again, that we're working very closely with all organizations across all levels of government to try to get the word out so people are aware that that threat's there.
Yeah, we've talked a little about sort of the offensive ways that AI is being used, but are there any defensive ways that we're implementing into the government systems?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say one specifically. You already mentioned CrowdStrike. They've been using AI and ML in their platform for forever. They're deploying a new version of their endpoint detection product sometime later this month or next month, I believe, sometime in the near future, which is going to further integrate additional AI and generative AI technology into that platform. And something that AI is fantastic at is combing through copious amounts of data and identifying anomalous data points, which is exactly what we do in cybersecurity, right? We're looking through copious amounts of information that's coming through, hitting our networks, whether that's IP addresses or email or just information itself flowing across our networks, and trying to find unusual bits in that information. And that's something that I can't devote, multiple tens or dozens or even a handful of analysts to do on a daily basis, that we can just throw this information into a machine learning model or to a language learning model and pick out that information and say, oh, this is interesting. Your analyst should go pay attention to this. And I think that's the critical piece that, at least for the time being, we want to make sure that people understand is that, yes, AI and generative AI have some fantastic capabilities, but we still need a human in the loop, right? We want it to spit out something to say, go take action on this, but we still want a human analyst or someone, an engineer, to be able to look at that and say, yes, this makes sense, or no, this doesn't make sense. And having that continuous feedback loop of this was good response, this was bad response. How do we make sure we make this better?
Yeah, it sounds like that would be great for threat hunting and kind of that SOC MDR type functionality.
Yep.
Um, on the subject of AI, it seems like governments and private organizations right now are all kind of in the early process of writing their AI policy or coming up with an AI policy. Can you talk a little bit about how the state government views AI and kind of what their policy framework is?
Yeah, and I'll say in coordination, because we're a bit unique here in Arizona where the cybersecurity office is separate from the IT organization. So the state CIO, J.R. Sloan, and his office and my office have been working in coordination to write the state's AI policy. and it's currently in draft. We're finalizing that. That's supposed to be released sometime, I believe, in the very near future. So essentially, we're taking the stance of we want to allow innovation with the use of AI because we know that there's a bunch of fantastic creative opportunities to help not only our technologists but also to improve the services we deliver to our citizens. But we also need to take the approach of understanding what the potential risks are, both from a privacy perspective and a security perspective, but also knowing that AI models are going to have biases inherently built into them and being very aware of that when we're starting to talk about this is now affecting citizens' lives. So, not stifling innovation. We want to make sure that our users within state government are allowed and understand the threats, but also want to make sure that they're not being stifled in the creativity and the use of this technology as they move forward.
So to shift a little bit, the past it seems like the past year, 2 years, really we've started to see a lot more of headlines about Chinese state-sponsored hackers in the grid and the naval infrastructure. Microsoft. Can you talk a little bit about the threats to critical infrastructure and kind of what preparations the state takes for that? Because it seems like in a lot of ways they're very vulnerable because they're very old technologies. They don't have a lot of the cybersecurity functionality or the ability to support functionality that a modern technology would have.
Yeah, I'll say one of the biggest concerns that I have outside of the elections coming up this year and making sure that those are run safely and securely is threats to our critical infrastructure. And there's been multiple testimony at the federal level. Director Easterly with CISA and a few others have talked about how China is already pre-positioning itself within our critical infrastructure in order to not only extract and exfiltrate sensitive information about that critical infrastructure, but pre-positioning themselves for a potential conflict in the future. And obviously, that's terrifying. And I'll say, to your point, legacy technical debt is going to be one of the major challenges there, especially when we look at critical infrastructure that's typically seen itself as separate from traditional IT and the IT organizations that support it. That OT environment has been sort of, we're going to wall everything off, we'll handle it, don't worry about it, technology department. This is not traditional IT, we got it. But now we're starting to see where that OT environment is either bridging the gap between IT and OT. There's communication out to the internet. Oftentimes, we're seeing even direct connections from the internet into those OT environments, where we need to make sure that there's proper monitoring and that there's proper defensive capabilities to protect that infrastructure. So, say this is absolutely something top of mind. I recently gave testimony to our Arizona Corporation Commission to try to better understand the threat to critical infrastructure here within the state of Arizona, partnering with our Department of Public Safety, who houses the critical infrastructure database, and partnering with other organizations across the state to better understand both the vulnerability and the potential threats that they're going to be facing. So we can help make sure that our policy and decision makers are making accurate and risk-based decisions, but also ensuring that we're getting them the best possible protections to ensure that they don't have that bad day.
On the topic of kind of state-sponsored hackers and the election season coming up, there's been a lot of talk about, like we just saw that big Meta outage or LinkedIn outage, that state-sponsored hackers could cause a bunch of outages like that right around election or on election, which would cause a lot of debate around the elections. How does a state view, obviously protecting their own infrastructure, but also a lot of private infrastructure that still has a big influence? Its availability has a big influence on the elections.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, confidence is king when it comes to the election infrastructure and democracy as a whole. And it doesn't take much for our adversaries to be able to erode that confidence, as we've seen over the past several years. So while we don't have direct authority to be able to influence or protect that privately held critical infrastructure, at least at the state level, we've been partnering very closely with our federal partners that do have some of that authority and that capability to assist them and ensure that they're shored up as much as possible. Going into any really realistically, not just the election season, but really, just continuing to operate in this heightened sense of adversarial activity.
Jumping back a little bit to the ICS devices and critical infrastructure, are a lot of the vulnerabilities, same vulnerabilities we've seen for a long time, just different flavors, or is it, due to the old technology being used? Where are we seeing a lot of these vulnerabilities coming from?
So I'll say yes. It's a combination of those things. A lot of it's old technology that isn't traditionally managed by technology departments, right? So you've got your ICS and SCADA departments that are typically managing that stuff on their own. And historically, in those environments, it's been the old school adage of security by obscurity. No one understands how this technology works. No one even knows that it exists on our network. So we don't really have to worry about putting security measures in place. Even if someone gets into our network, they're not going to know what to do with this stuff in the first place. But realistically, that's not the name of the game anymore, right? All the tech manuals that go with this ICS environment are all posted online. All the default credentials are known to all the threat actors, and we saw that recently, right, where an entire environment was compromised because they had default credentials on their OT devices. So I think we're going to have to take a closer look, especially as we start deploying smarter all of the things, right? We're doing smart cities and smart grids and smart devices. And we need to make sure that as we're plugging all of those things into the internet and interconnecting all of them with the rest of our IT, that we're deploying and developing all the same security controls and measures as we would for our regular technology stacks.
How much talk is there around updating some of that old infrastructure? I know it's very difficult to do without causing an outage or significant downtime.
So there's definitely a lot of conversations around it. I think this is going to come back to the manufacturers themselves prioritizing, and you've probably seen CISA and their secure by default or secure by design initiatives, ensuring that manufacturers are starting to build security into everything that they deploy. Because realistically, this can't be a problem bolted on afterwards. It needs to be something that's baked into all of the technology that's being deployed out there. And right now, the bulk of that weight of trying to defend against the attacks is being put on the customers, being put on us as end users, and we just don't have the resources to continue to deal with it. It was I'd have to look at the numbers, but it was tens of thousands of vulnerabilities released last year, and we're on par to be above that number again this year. And a high number of those critical that can be taken advantage of by unsophisticated threat actors. And we're putting this technology on some of the most critical services that we provide to our citizens and to our customers. And it's just unmanageable and unsustainable for us to think that we can potentially keep up with that. So, talking more to manufacturers to make sure that they're building security by default into their technology. The FTC and other federal organizations are taking a closer look at this to make sure that if you aren't doing this, we are going to hold you accountable, because too much and too often we're seeing critical infrastructure getting impacted by cyber attacks or just technology failures. And with how interconnected everything is these days, that's not something that we can continue to sustain.
So, to shift a little bit to more of a personal question, before coming into cybersecurity leadership, what things did you believe and how has being in a leadership role changed those opinions?
Oh, that's a tough one. So I'll say a lesson I heard to learn, a lesson I had to learn the hard way throughout my career was that cybersecurity is not always going to be the most important thing in the room, right? When we're talking to board level executives, when we're talking to the cabinet with the governor's office, they have to balance all of the needs and all of the services that are being provided, oftentimes life and death services to citizens and to employees. And if I come in there screaming about how, hey, there's a bunch of cyber attacks and phishing emails are flying everywhere, like they just don't care, right? They care, but they don't care outside of how does this impact the services I'm delivering. And I really early in my career kind of rode this rage and apathy wave of like super angry and super frustrated that people just weren't getting it that cyber is important, and then just being like, all right, well, I'm just gonna put my head down, I'm gonna get my work done, and it just sucks that people don't take this seriously. And I've kind of had to find that balance of really maturing myself in my communication method, as well as understanding that truly I am a risk advisor to these business executives. My job is to provide to them the best possible understanding of risk to their business objectives, to the services that they're providing, and then let them make the decision on whether that is balanced out with other risks, whether that's financial risk or reputational risk or physical risks. Cyber is just another risk along those lines that they have to balance out and determine which one is the most important today. And sometimes that will be cyber, right? If we're in the middle of a ransomware attack that's impacting the entire state or even just a local government municipality, it's going to be the most important thing for them that day. But they're also balancing, how do I message this out to my citizens? How am I paying my employees? Are we not getting unemployment benefits out to people? And are now they potentially not able to feed their families? So while cyber overarchingly encompasses a lot of these services and can be the most important thing in the room, I've had to learn the lesson the hard way not to just get angry and ragey about saying, look, cyber is important. We have to pay attention to this thing, and really rephrasing it and reframing it in a way that aligns with what is truly important to those business executives.
Yeah, that's very relatable too. I guess being a cybersecurity entrepreneur where there's that business development sales aspect where you find out it's not a revenue driver, and a lot of companies
That's right.
care most about the revenue drivers
Yep.
until it is a revenue driver.
We're all seen as a cost center until we're not, right?
What about what's been the most stressful thing? Maybe it's over your whole career. What's been the most stressful thing? Maybe responding to incidents or
I mean, certainly responding to some incidents has been pretty stressful, right? That we don't really know what this is. We don't know how bad it's going to be. We don't know necessarily how they got in or how we're going to stop them from doing this again. That unknown, that uncertainty can certainly be stressful. I'll say more recently, just trying to solve the entire world's problems because everything is interconnected and everything is related to cyber these days. That's pretty stressful too. And we're a pretty small team here, and trying to make sure to balance out. We have to do everything right all the time, every time, and our attackers only have to get it right once, to be successful. And knowing that I can't burn through my teammates and expect them to do everything all day, every day. I think that's probably been the most stressful and the most challenging, is making sure that we're understanding we're still working with people, that people are fallible, that people have upper limits on how much you can press them to get work done, but still knowing that the mission we're trying to accomplish is incredibly important and has to be done, right? It's something that we can't just say, you know what, maybe we don't do this cyber thing today just because we don't have enough resources. And then we, have a school district that gets hit with ransomware and they're taken offline and students are not getting instructed for the next 3 months. It's something that we can't let happen. And really trying to balance those two competing priorities is probably one of the most stressful things.
In a similar vein, how do you start and go about building a cybersecurity culture at the state level? You said you have a small team, but cyber is in everything. So how do you start sort of building that culture to where everybody starts caring more about it because it's related to stuff they're working on?
Well, and
and are you still using Tim's Swedish fish?
yeah, and so not to give Tim a hard time, but he stole that from me, so I'm going to steal it back. I started doing this when I was over at Department of Revenue, giving out Swedish fish and goldfish for any employee that reported a phishing email and was found out to be a legitimate phishing email, and then we could take that and highlight that and say, look, you helped to protect the state of Arizona, and we shared this phishing email and all the indicators of compromise within it with the rest of the state agencies, with all of our cities and counties, with our tribal communities, with our school districts. You personally, employee, are helping to protect and secure the entire state of Arizona. And I hope that resonates. I hope it's not just goldfish and Swedish fish, right? Everyone loves snacks, especially in government. I hope that message resonates a bit. And I think carrying that out, right? Something I will give Tim credit for is he liked to talk about how we made it mandatory for all employees across the state of Arizona to do security awareness training. And this turned our team, which was about 12 at the time, now 20, into a team of 35,000 across the entire state. And I'm ramping that up now and saying we're going to turn that into a team of 200,000 across all of our local government entities and technology and cyber people, all of our teachers, all of our students, everyone out there, everywhere across the state. We're going to turn them into cyber professionals in one way or another. That way, when they do see these threats, they understand the importance of what it is, and they know that the information has to be shared. and that it is truly about protecting the entire community, not just I've got my silos, I've got my fiefdom, I've got my kingdom prepared and protected. I don't need to worry about what happens outside of my walls. Because again, we're all interconnected. All the cities talk to the state, all the cities talk to the county talks to all the other organizations around them, the states talk to each other. We're all connected at the national level. All this stuff is interconnected. And we can't look at it anymore as I've got my own house in order because we're all part of the same neighborhood.
So to jump back, you mentioned kind of along the lines of employees. It seems like I think it's a relatable problem to MSPs and small businesses as well, is that a lot of times it's tough to retain employees, especially once they get that experience. And a large bank or someone could be offering them significantly more incentives to go there. How do you retain the level of talent that you need to successfully defend the networks?
So I'll say two things. We don't, right? Exactly as you mentioned, we bring people in, we teach them, we train them, and then large organizations recognize the talent and then they go to work for them and they pay them a livable wage, which I can't. So I think we've tried to lean into that, right? We've built technology and processes in place to make sure that there's that foundation, regardless of who's sitting in the chair. I want to make sure that if people are coming to poach our employees, it's for a good reason, right? I would love to be seen as the organization where you can come and grow and become a fantastic cyber professional and then go on to get an amazing job somewhere else, whether that's with government or in the private sector. That's, to me, that's a win, right? If our employees are so amazing that they're getting poached to go work somewhere else, I call that a win. Plus, it's helping to spread the message, right? It's helping to put other people that have already lived in our world, that believe in the mission of trying to support the entire state. They're now doing that same thing in the private sector, or they're going to work for another city or another county or another school district somewhere else within the state of Arizona. They're doing the same thing there. And in fact, when I first took this role, my entire leadership team turned over 100%. But they all went on to become CISOs. They all went on to become senior security managers in large corporations. They're all kicking butt elsewhere within the state of Arizona. And to me, I consider that a win.
So as we get to the end here, I got one last question.
Sure.
If you weren't doing cyber, what would you be doing?
Oh man. At this point, like living in a cabin in the middle of the woods, just hanging out with a dog and growing some corn or something, that sounds pretty amazing. Just getting away from the craziness of everyday life. Uh, to be realistic, though, if I was to be in another career, oh man, I don't know, probably education, or maybe law enforcement. And I say kind of a mix of those two things because my mom was a teacher growing up, my dad was a cop growing up, and I think that's really informed a lot of what I've done in my own career. I worked for a school district as a technologist. I'm now working for the Department of Homeland Security, trying to help defend and protect the entire state from cyber attacks. We're partnering very closely with the Department of Public Safety and our law enforcement partners. We work really closely with the FBI, trying to give information back so they can actually catch these cyber criminals and put them in prison. Because continuing to play whack-a-mole has been a losing game for a number of years. So I think probably something along those lines. I think I would have gone one way or the other, following in the footpaths of my parents. But I think I found a nice happy medium here in the middle where I get to enjoy the experiences of both.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you.
If people want to follow you for more insights, where's the best spot?
Probably LinkedIn. That's where I put most of my content. I'm not a huge X user, but if you want to find me on Instagram, I do a lot of natural pictures around the Arizona desert. So I like to pretend I'm an amateur photographer. So maybe that's another career path.
Yeah, I can fit in with your house in the woods.
There you go. Love it.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate you guys' time today and looking forward to future conversations.